The moment I walked into the courtroom, my daughter-in-law let out a laugh, and seconds later the judge pronounced my full name. I never thought those two things together would mark the day my life split in two. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a second, feel like this seems familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to continue unburdening myself. My name is Carol Dolores Miller, I am 73 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew my family. That October morning, as I walked through the halls of the Superior Court of Los Angeles County, I was wearing my navy blue dress, the same one I had worn to graduations, weddings, and confirmations for the last 20 years. My hands were trembling inside my worn leather purse, where I kept the last documents I had left, my driver's license, a photo of my late husband John, and the original deed to the house in Pasadena that we had bought together in 1978. The courthouse smell of disinfectant and old paper mingled with the scent of my cheap perfume, that violet-scented cologne I bought at CVS because it was the only thing I could afford since my Social Security checks had become insufficient for everything. My black low-heeled shoes made a sharp sound against the marble as I followed the public defender assigned to me, a young man who had barely spoken a word to me during the 15 minutes of our only meeting. Courtroom 4 opened before me like a cold cathedral. The dark wooden benches were almost empty, except for 3 figures I recognized immediately: my son Michael, sitting in the front row with his head down, my daughter-in-law Patricia, impeccably dressed in a pearl gray suit that I knew cost more than 3 months of my pension, and their lawyer, a man with a silk tie who was reviewing papers with the ease of someone who has done this hundreds of times. Michael didn't look at me as I passed him. For 45 years he had been my boy, my only son, the little one who hid behind my skirts when he had nightmares. Now, at 45, sitting there in his wrinkled office suit, he looked like a stranger. Patricia, however, followed me with her eyes, and when our gazes met, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of greeting, nor of nervousness. It was the smile of someone who knows they have already won. I sat on the bench designated for the respondents. What a cold word to describe a mother, and I remembered the first time Patricia had set foot in my house. It was December 2018, Michael had brought her to meet me after 6 months of dating. She had arrived with a bouquet of expensive flowers and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, praising my Sunday pot roast while secretly photographing every corner of the house with her cell phone. What an authentic place, Carol, she had told me, it must be worth a fortune in this area. The judge entered and we all stood. He was a man in his 50s, with small glasses and an expression that had seen too many families destroyed before his bench. When he sat down and allowed us to do the same, the silence in the room became as heavy as a damp blanket. "Good morning," he said in a neutral voice. "We are here to review the conservatorship petition filed by Mr. Michael Miller and Mrs. Patricia Vance against Mrs. Carol Dolores Miller, born March 15, 1950. Hearing my full name pronounced that way, as if I were a criminal, as if I were a stranger in my own life, sent a chill down my spine from my neck to my toes. Patricia then let out that laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh, it was pure triumph. A laugh that said, "Finally," a laugh that echoed off the marble walls like the slap of a hand. Michael's lawyer stood up and began to read the petition in a monotone voice. "We request that the court declare Mrs. Carol Miller incapable of managing her assets, given her state of cognitive decline and her inability to make rational decisions regarding her estate." Every word was a stab wrapped in legal paper. While he spoke, I looked at Michael. Would he remember the day I sold my wedding jewelry to pay for his college tuition? Would he remember the nights I spent awake taking care of him when he had pneumonia at age 12? Would he remember that I took out a second mortgage on the house twice to help him start his first business, which failed, and then the second, which also failed? The house in Pasadena. My refuge for 45 years. The place where John and I had been happy, where I had raised Michael, where I had mourned my husband's death, where I had grown old believing I had a safe home until the end of my days. The living room with the burgundy velvet curtains I had embroidered myself, the kitchen where every Sunday I prepared pot roast for Michael and his family, the bedroom where I still kept John's clothes because I didn't have the heart to get rid of them. Patricia laughed again when the lawyer mentioned the respondent's unhealthy obsession with keeping objects of no sentimental value. I knew exactly what she was referring to: my collection of porcelain figurines I had inherited from my mother, the love letters John wrote to me when we were dating, the drawings Michael had made in elementary school that I had framed with such pride. Objects without value, Patricia had said the last time she had come for dinner. "Carol, this place looks like a horror museum. I don't know how you can live surrounded by so much old stuff." Michael hadn't said anything, just nodded as he cut his steak, avoiding my gaze. Now, sitting in that cold room, I understood that it wasn't the first time they had talked about me as if I were a problem to be solved. How many conversations had they had about my incapacity? How many times had I been the subject of their private dinners? Since when had my existence become an obstacle to their plans? The judge looked at me directly for the first time. Mrs. Miller, do you understand why you are here today? My voice came out firmer than I expected. Yes, Your Honor. I'm here because my son and his wife want to have me declared crazy to take my house. Patricia stopped smiling. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Patricia shifted in her seat as if she had received an invisible slap, while Michael finally lifted his head to look at me with those eyes that were once mine, that now seemed like those of a stranger who had learned to lie too easily. Their lawyer cleared his throat and continued reading his list of fabricated accusations. The respondent exhibits erratic behavior, such as talking to herself, forgetting important dates, and maintaining the house in unsanitary conditions. Every lie fell like a drop of poison in my ears. Talking to myself? Of course I talked to myself. It was the only sincere conversation I had since John died 5 years ago. Forgetting dates? I had never forgotten Michael's birthday, or a doctor's appointment, or the anniversary of my husband's death. While the man continued to invent my mental deterioration, my mind traveled back 40 years, when Michael was 5 and broke his leg playing in Griffith Park. I was working 12-hour days cleaning offices in downtown LA to pay the rent on our small apartment in Boyle Heights, but for 2 months I dropped everything to take care of him. I was left without a job, without savings, but my boy recovered. John sold his bicycle, his only hobby, to buy the medicines that our insurance didn't cover. Do you remember, Michael? I thought, staring at him, do you remember when you asked me for money to marry Patricia and I pawned the engagement ring your father gave me? It was a simple ring, white gold with a small diamond, but it was the only valuable thing I had. I took it to a pawn shop on Figueroa Street and accepted half of its real value without haggling. With that money, Michael was able to rent the ballroom at the Beverly Hilton where Patricia had insisted on having their wedding. Patricia had wanted everything perfect: flowers imported from Holland, a designer wedding dress, a guest list that included people she didn't even know well. A wedding only happens once, Carol, she had told me in that sweet voice she used when she wanted something. You understand how important it is for a woman. I understood, of course I understood. That's why I worked extra shifts for 6 months, why I ate rice and eggs almost every night, why I told Michael yes when he asked me to co-sign the loan they needed to complete the payment. The judge interrupted the lawyer. Do you have any medical evidence to support these accusations? We are in the process of obtaining it, Your Honor, the man replied without flinching. But the family testimonies are clear and consistent. Family testimonies? What family was he talking about? Patricia, who had come into our lives just 5 years ago. Michael, who visited me once a month and stayed just long enough to have a coffee and ask if I needed anything, but left before I could really tell him how I felt. I remembered last Christmas. I had prepared dinner for 2 days, a honey-glazed ham, his favorite dish since childhood, homemade fudge, and shortbread cookies I had learned to make from my mother-in-law. The table was set for 6 because Patricia had promised to bring her parents. They arrived 2 hours late, when the food was already cold. Patricia was on the phone the whole dinner talking about a trip to Hawaii they were planning, while Michael constantly checked his phone. They left before dessert, claiming they had another family dinner. I was left alone clearing the untouched plates, wrapping up the food no one had really tasted, blowing out the candles I had lit with such excitement. That night I cried for the first time since John's funeral, not because of the loneliness, but because of the certainty that my son no longer saw me as his mother, but as an obligation to be dealt with from time to time. Mrs. Miller, the judge said to me directly, can you tell us in your own words what your relationship with your family has been like in recent years? I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my 73 years on my knees, but also feeling a strange strength I didn't know I still had. Your Honor, for 48 years I have been a mother. I have given everything I had and much of what I didn't have. I have sold, pawned, and mortgaged everything I owned so that my son could have the opportunities one never had. Patricia looked at me with that condescending smile I knew all too well. The same smile she had put on when she suggested it would be better for me to sell the house and move into a nursing home. For your own safety, Carol. At your age, living alone in such a big house is dangerous. Besides, think of all the money you would spend if you had to pay someone to take care of you. And where would that money be? I had asked her. In an investment fund that Michael would manage for you, she had replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That way you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Not worry about a thing. Not decide on anything. Basically, not exist. 3 months ago, I continued, addressing the judge, my daughter-in-law visited me to tell me she had found a lovely nursing home in Lancaster. She showed me pictures on her phone, shared rooms, communal dining halls, supervised activities for senior citizens. When I asked her how much it cost, she told me not to worry, that the money from the sale of my house would cover it perfectly. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For a moment, our eyes met and I saw something that could have been shame, but it vanished so quickly I thought I had imagined it. And what did you reply? Asked the judge. I told her that my house was not for sale. That John and I had bought it to live in until the end of our days, and that I intended to keep that promise. My voice grew firmer. Patricia told me it was sentimental nonsense, that houses are just bricks and mortar, that the important thing is to be comfortable and safe. Comfortable and safe? I thought. Like I had felt comfortable and safe when, after that conversation, Patricia had started bringing specialists to my house. First, it was a real estate appraiser who said he had come to check the facilities for the insurance. Then a doctor, a friend of the family, who wanted to give me a general checkup. Then a lawyer who needed to update some papers from John's estate. They were all kind, professional, smiling. They all asked me questions that seemed innocent but that I now understood were designed to find cracks in my mental competence. What day is it today, Carol? Do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning? Could you explain to me how you manage your finances? I answered patiently, believing they were genuinely concerned for my well-being. I didn't understand that each answer was ammunition they were collecting to use against me in this very room, before this very judge, at this very moment when my life was being decided without me having a real voice or vote. Do you know why your family believes you cannot take care of yourself? The judge asked me. I looked at Patricia, who was no longer smiling. I looked at Michael, who was avoiding my gaze like when he was a child and had broken something. I looked at the lawyer, who was reviewing his papers with feigned concentration. Your Honor, I said with a calmness that surprised myself, I don't think my family believes I can't take care of myself. I think they believe that me taking care of myself no longer suits them. The words I had just spoken fell upon the room like stones in a silent pond. Patricia sat up straight in her seat, for the first time losing that calculated composure she had maintained throughout the process. Michael closed his eyes as if he wanted to disappear, and the lawyer stopped pretending to review his papers to look at me with an expression that wavered between surprise and respect. The judge took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, that universal gesture of someone who needs time to process what they have just heard. Explain that, Mrs. Miller. Do you remember the last time your son visited you without asking for something in return? My public defender asked, who for the first time seemed genuinely interested in my case. The question hit me like a punch to the stomach because it forced me to realize something I had been denying for years. I tried to remember a single visit from Michael in the last 2 years that hadn't been preceded by a phone call starting with, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." The last one had been in August. Michael arrived on a Sunday afternoon, sweaty and nervous, with a folder under his arm. "Mom, I have an incredible investment opportunity," he had said while I was making him homemade lemonade in the kitchen. "It's an import business with Patricia, but we need a co-signer for the bank loan." I had stopped slicing the lemon and looked at him. "How much money, Michael?" $30,000. "But it's just to co-sign, Mom. You won't have to pay anything. It's just a guarantee the bank needs." $30,000. The approximate value of my house at that time, according to the appraiser Patricia had brought months before. The conversation had lasted 3 hours, with Michael explaining the wonders of importing Mexican crafts to sell in shops in Los Angeles. Patricia had appeared halfway through the chat, as if her arrival were a coincidence, with more papers and graphs that showed how profitable the business would be. "And if something goes wrong?" I had asked them. "Nothing is going to go wrong, Carol," Patricia had replied with that smile I now recognized as pure manipulation. "But if for some crazy reason the business doesn't work out, we would take care of everything. You wouldn't lose a single dollar." I had signed. Just as I had always signed everything Michael asked of me, because he was my son and because for 48 years I had believed that children do not betray their mothers. The import business had lasted exactly 3 months before unforeseen complications with suppliers led it to bankruptcy. The bank had started calling me in November. "Mrs. Miller," a polite but firm voice had told me, "we are contacting you because the loan co-signed with your property has 3 overdue payments. We need you to get up to date with the payments or we will proceed as stipulated in the contract." When I called Michael, his phone went to voicemail. When I went to his house, Patricia met me at the door with a look of feigned surprise. "Oh, Carol, Michael isn't here. He went to Chicago for work. Is everything all right?" "The bank called me about the loan," I had told her. "What loan?" she had asked, blinking innocently. "Oh, you mean the one for the business? But that's all been sorted out, dear. It must be a mistake." But it wasn't a mistake. Over the following weeks, the calls from the bank became daily. Then the letters arrived. Then, the payment demands. Michael had disappeared as if the earth had swallowed him up, and Patricia always had a perfect excuse. He was traveling, he was sick, he was in important meetings he couldn't interrupt. "When did you realize you had been deceived?" the judge asked me. "The day I went to the bank to try to understand what was happening," I replied. The employee showed me the papers I had signed. It wasn't just a co-signature, as they had told me. It was a mortgage on my house. With my signature, I had put my home up as collateral for a loan that wasn't for a business, but to buy a beach condo in Miami. The silence in the room became as thick as the air before a storm. Patricia had completely lost her composure and was looking at Michael with an expression that mixed panic and fury. Michael had his head buried in his hands. "A condo in Miami?" the judge repeated. "Yes, Your Honor. $30,000 for the down payment on a beach condo they were going to use as an investment." When I confronted Michael, he told me it had been Patricia's idea, that she had insisted it was a unique opportunity, that they had explained it to me wrong but that everything would turn out fine. I remembered that conversation. It had been a Tuesday night. Michael had shown up at my house after 10, drunk and crying. "Forgive me, Mom. I didn't want this to happen. Patricia convinced me it was for the best. She said that after selling the condo, we would have enough money to buy something better for you." "Something better for me?" I had asked. "Better than my own home?" "A nice nursing home, Mom. A place where you don't have to worry about anything, where there are people taking care of you 24 hours a day." That night I understood that for my son, I was no longer Carol, his mother. I was a logistical problem that had to be solved in the most convenient way possible. I was an old woman who generated expenses and worries, who occupied a house too valuable for its actual use. "What did you do then?" the judge continued. "I tried to save my house. I worked cleaning houses in the mornings and taking care of Mrs. Fernandez in the afternoons. Mrs. Davis, my neighbor from the 5th floor, got me sewing jobs. For 4 months, I managed to pay the loan installments. Those had been the hardest 4 months of my life since John's death. I would get up at 5 in the morning to get to the Ruiz's house in Beverly Hills, where I cleaned until noon. Then I would rush to the subway to get to Mrs. Fernandez's house in Hancock Park, an 86-year-old woman with Alzheimer's who needed companionship and supervision. At night, I would sew until my eyes watered. I repaired clothes, made alterations, embroidered tablecloths on commission. My hands, which had been soft and well cared for when John was alive, became covered in cuts and calluses. My back protested every morning when I got up. I lost 20 pounds because I often ran out of money for food after paying the installments. But I had managed to keep my house. Until Patricia decided that my effort was pathetic and degrading to the whole family. "Is it true that Mrs. Ruiz fired you because you showed signs of mental confusion?" Michael's lawyer asked, reading from his notes. "That's a lie," I replied firmly. "Mrs. Ruiz fired me because Patricia went to talk to her. She told her that I was starting to show symptoms of dementia, that it was dangerous to leave me alone with responsibilities, that they could have legal problems if something happened to me while I was working in her house." Patricia's face completely fell. Michael looked at her with an expression of horror that suggested this information was new to him as well. "Do you have any proof of that?" the judge asked. "Mrs. Ruiz told me everything when I went to get my last paycheck. She told me she was very sorry, but she couldn't take the risk. Patricia had shown her a medical report that supposedly proved my cognitive decline." "What medical report?" my lawyer asked. "One that I had never seen. Signed by a doctor I didn't know. Dated for a consultation I had never attended." The judge leaned forward in his seat. "Are you accusing your daughter-in-law of forging medical documents?" "I am saying that someone forged medical documents, Your Honor. And that forgery cost me my job, my ability to pay the loan installments, and ultimately my house." Patricia shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous. This woman is clearly disturbed. Sit down," the judge ordered her in a cold voice. But Patricia could no longer control the situation as she had planned. Her perfect mask had cracked, and what was underneath was not pretty. "Do you know what the saddest part of all this is, Your Honor?" I said, looking directly at Michael, who had finally raised his head to face me. "That during all these months, while I was fighting to save my house, while I was working myself to exhaustion, while I was going hungry to pay the debts they had created in my name, I still believed that my son loved me. I kept thinking that Patricia was just confused, that when Michael realized what was happening, he would come to help me." Michael opened his mouth as if to say something, but no sound came out. "And when did you stop believing that?" the judge asked me with a gentleness I hadn't expected. "The day I lost my house," and Michael didn't answer a single one of my calls. "The day I lost my house was a rainy Friday in February. I remember every detail with a clarity that hurts, the sound of the drops against the living room windows, the smell of dampness seeping through the poorly sealed joints, the cold metal of the keys in my hand when I handed them over to the court officer. I had called Michael 17 times that day. I know because I counted each rejected call on the screen of my old phone, hoping the 18th would be different. It wasn't. The officer, a young man with a face that looked like he hadn't slept in days, explained in a monotone voice that I had 3 hours to collect my personal belongings. "Only what you can carry, ma'am. The rest will remain as part of the collateral until the debt is settled. 3 hours to pack up 45 years of life. 3 hours to decide which memories deserve to survive and which I could leave behind forever." I went up to my bedroom with a suitcase John had used on our honeymoon to San Francisco, and I stood in front of the open closet, paralyzed by the impossibility of the task. How could I choose between my wedding photograph and the last drawing Michael had made for me in elementary school? Between my mother's rosary and the letter John wrote me when he was diagnosed with cancer? Between the dress I wore for Michael's graduation and the blanket I had knitted during the long months of my husband's chemotherapy? In the end, I put the first thing I touched into the suitcase, without looking, because any conscious decision would have been like choosing which part of my soul to amputate. I zipped it up and walked down the stairs without looking back, because I knew if I did, I wouldn't have the strength to leave. Mrs. Davis, my neighbor from the 5th floor, was waiting for me at the entrance with red eyes and a plastic bag full of sandwiches. "Carol, my dear," she said, hugging me, "you have my couch for as long as you need." Her 2-bedroom apartment already housed her divorced daughter and her 2 grandchildren, but she offered me her couch as if it were a palace. That night, lying on that couch that smelled of lavender in Mrs. Davis's years, I dialed Michael's number one last time. This time he answered. "Mom?" His voice sounded strange, as if he had been drinking or crying, or both. "Michael," I whispered, "I lost the house." Silence. "Michael? Are you there?" "Yes, Mom. I'm here. Can you come?" "I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't know what I'm going to do." Another silence, longer this time. I heard voices in the background, and I recognized Patricia's saying something I couldn't understand. "Mom, listen. Patricia says we can help you find a nursing home. A nice one, where you'll be comfortable." "Michael, I'm your mother." "I know." "You know? Do you really know?" "Mom, please. Don't make this harder than it already is." "Harder. For him." I hung up the phone and never called him again. The following days passed like a blurry nightmare. Mrs. Davis took care of me as if I were her own mother, making me chamomile tea and forcing me to eat even though everything tasted like cardboard. Her grandchildren, Paul and Lucy, 8 and 10, treated me with the instinctive delicacy that children have for wounded people. "Grandma Carol," Lucy told me one afternoon while I was looking out the window at nothing, "my mom says that bad people sometimes win, but only for a little while. Do you think that's true?" I looked at her, with her messy pigtails and her toothless smile, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. "I think your mom is very wise." It was Paul who brought me the news a week later. He had been playing in the park when he saw Michael and Patricia getting out of a new, shiny silver Mercedes. They looked very happy, he told me, and the lady was wearing a coat that sparkled like the stars. That night, Mrs. Davis sat with me on the small balcony of her apartment, smoking one of her Sunday cigarettes while I drank chamomile tea. "Carol, my dear," she said, "do you know what hurts me the most about all of this?" "What?" "That you're still waiting for Michael to show up at that door asking for forgiveness." She was right. Despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayals and the lost house, a part of me was still waiting for the doorbell to ring and for it to be him, with flowers in his hand and tears in his eyes, telling me it had all been a terrible mistake, that he had gotten my house back, that Patricia was out of our lives forever. But the days passed, and then the weeks, and Michael didn't come. Instead, a certified letter arrived. The mailman brought it on a Tuesday morning, and Mrs. Davis signed for me because my hands were shaking too much to hold the pen. The envelope was heavy, official, with the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a conservatorship petition. In view of the evident cognitive decline of Mrs. Carol Dolores Miller, the document said with that legal coldness that turned my pain into numbered paragraphs, and considering her demonstrated inability to responsibly manage her assets, we request that the court declare her legally incapacitated and appoint appropriate guardians for the administration of her estate and personal care. The proposed guardians were Michael and Patricia. Mrs. Davis read the petition twice before speaking. "Carol," she finally said, "this isn't just about money. This is about erasing you completely." She was right again. It wasn't enough to have taken my house. Now they wanted to take away my right to exist as an autonomous person, my legal capacity to make decisions about my own life. They wanted to officially turn me into what they had already made me feel, a burden, a problem, an obstacle to their plans that had to be legally neutralized. That afternoon, while Mrs. Davis was at the market and the children were at school, I dialed Patricia's number. This time, I was the one who wanted to talk. "Carol," her voice sounded surprised, almost amused. "How are you? Michael told me you'd settled into your new situation." "Patricia, I got the papers." "Ah, that." Her tone became more professional, colder. "Look, Carol, I know it might seem harsh, but it's for the best. For everyone. You included. The best for me is to be declared incompetent? Carol, let's be realistic. You lost your house because of poor financial decisions. You're living on a borrowed couch. Do you really think you're in a position to manage your life?" Her logic was both perfect and perverse. She had created the conditions for my destruction and was now using them as evidence of my incompetence. You know what's the funniest thing about all this, Patricia? I said. What? That for all these years, I've been wondering what I did wrong as a mother-in-law. What I did to make you dislike me. Now I realize it wasn't that you disliked me. It was that you saw me as a means to an end, and now that you don't need me anymore, I'm just in the way. Carol, you're being dramatic. Dramatic? Patricia, you stole my house, you destroyed my job, you forged medical documents, and now you want a judge to declare that I'm crazy. What part of that is dramatic? Silence on the other end of the line. Do you know what else I've discovered? I continued. That you're not the first. I've been talking to other women in my situation. Women whose children decided their mothers were too much trouble and too little profit. The lawyer assigned to me told me that cases like mine have increased by 300% in the last 5 years. Carol, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about the fact that this isn't difficult family love, Patricia. This is systematic financial abuse. And now I'm going to prove it. You're going to prove it? With what? With what money are you going to pay for lawyers? With what evidence? Her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. Now it sounded exactly like what it was, a predator that had been discovered. With the truth, I said. And with witnesses you didn't know existed. What witnesses? Mrs. Davis was present when Dr. Mendoza supposedly came to see me for that medical report I never requested. She saw everything from her peephole. She saw you pay him in cash after he refused to sign anything because I was perfectly fine. Another silence, this one heavier. She also saw when you brought the appraiser who was supposedly there for the insurance. When the lawyers came. When all your specialists came to prepare for my demolition. You have nothing, Carol. I have something better than proof, Patricia. I have the truth. And in 3 days, I'm going to tell it to a judge. I hung up the phone and for the first time in months, I smiled. The 3 days before the hearing passed as if time had changed speed. In the mornings, the minutes crawled by like snails as I went over and over again what I was going to say to the judge. In the afternoons, the hours flew by as Mrs. Davis helped me organize the few documents I had managed to save and write a timeline of everything that had happened. Carol, my dear, she would say as we reviewed the dates at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and cold coffee cups, what you've written here isn't just your story. It's a survival manual for all women like us. Mrs. Davis was right. During those days, I had begun to understand that my situation was neither unique nor accidental. It was the result of a system that made older women easy targets for unscrupulous relatives, especially when property was involved. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay on Mrs. Davis's couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the building, the lady on the 3rd floor who coughed, the student on the 2nd who played music late, the couple on the 4th who argued quietly about bills. Sounds of normal life, of people who had homes and routines and the security of knowing where they would wake up tomorrow. I no longer had any of that, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely lost. There was something different in my chest, something that had been absent for so long I had forgotten what it felt like, determination. At 5 in the morning, I got up and showered with the care of someone preparing for battle. I put on the navy blue dress I had saved from my house, combed my hair back with the severity of a woman who had nothing left to lose, and looked at myself in Mrs. Davis's bathroom mirror. The woman who looked back at me was 73 years old, with deep wrinkles around her eyes, and hands marked by months of hard work. But she also had something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, strength. John, I whispered to my reflection, today I'm fighting for both of us. And now I was here, in this cold courtroom, watching Patricia lose her perfect composure as the judge took notes on everything I had told him. Michael still wouldn't look at me directly, but there was something in his posture that suggested that maybe, for the first time, he was beginning to truly understand what he had done. Mrs. Miller, the judge said after I finished explaining the phone conversation with Patricia, these are very serious allegations. Do you have any way of proving what you're saying? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, and I took a small digital recorder from my purse that Mrs. Davis had lent me. Patricia didn't know I was recording our phone conversation. Michael's lawyer immediately stood up. Objection. A recording without consent is not admissible as evidence. In this state, my public defender said with a confidence I hadn't seen in him before, recordings made by one of the parties in a conversation are admissible when it comes to defending threatened fundamental rights. Furthermore, Your Honor, my client was defending herself against what clearly constitutes systematic fraud. The judge nodded. Play the recording. The sound of Patricia's voice filled the room. Carol, let's be realistic. You lost your house because of poor financial decisions. You're living on a borrowed couch. Do you really think you're in a position to manage your life? And then my own voice, firmer than I remembered, Patricia, you stole my house, you destroyed my job, you forged medical documents, and now you want a judge to declare that I'm crazy. Patricia's response was devastating. Carol, I don't know what you're talking about. You're going to prove it? With what? With what money are you going to pay for lawyers? With what evidence? When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Patricia was as white as a sheet, and Michael had his head in his hands. Mrs. Vance, the judge addressed Patricia. Do you have anything to say about what we've just heard? Patricia stood up, trembling. That conversation is taken out of context. Carol was very upset. She didn't understand what I was trying to explain to her. What part is taken out of context? The judge asked. The part where you say Mrs. Miller lost her house due to poor decisions, or the part where you ask her with what money she is going to pay for lawyers? Your Honor, Patricia intervened with a broken voice, everything we've done has been for Carol's good. She can't take care of herself. Like she took care of herself when she worked 12-hour days to pay the debts you created in her name, the judge retorted. Like she took care of herself when your daughter-in-law sabotaged her employment. At that moment, the courtroom door opened and Mrs. Davis entered. She had come dressed in her best suit, the black one she wore for important occasions, and she walked with the dignity of someone who had lived 80 years without losing her decency. Excuse me, Your Honor, my lawyer said, but we have an additional witness. The judge allowed Mrs. Davis to approach the stand. As she was sworn in, she looked at me and winked. It was the bravest gesture I had seen in months. Mrs. Eleanor Davis, the judge said, reading her name, what can you tell us about Mrs. Miller's situation? Your Honor, Mrs. Davis began in a clear, firm voice, I have lived in the same building as Carol for 15 years. I have seen everything that has happened. Mrs. Davis told how she had observed the visits of the specialists that Patricia brought, how she had heard the conversations in the hallway, how she had seen Dr. Mendoza leave Carol's apartment with a look of disgust after refusing to sign a false report. Did you see the exchange of money? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Vance offered the doctor an envelope in the hallway. He refused it and left. Then she stayed on the phone, very upset, saying she was going to find another doctor who was more cooperative. Patricia slumped in her chair. Michael looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Anything else you consider relevant? The judge asked Mrs. Davis. Yes, Your Honor. I want you to know that Carol Miller is the most honest woman I know. During these months she has been in my house, she has insisted on cleaning, cooking, and helping with my grandchildren even though I told her it wasn't necessary. She is not a woman who needs anyone to make decisions for her. When Mrs. Davis returned to her seat, the judge addressed Michael directly. Mr. Miller, you haven't said a word so far. Do you have anything to add to what we've heard? Michael stood up slowly. His hands trembled as he gripped the back of the chair in front of him. Your Honor, he said in a broken voice, I think I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Patricia looked at him in horror. Michael, don't say anything else. Our lawyer. Shut up, Patricia, Michael interrupted her with a firmness that surprised me. You've done enough damage. He turned to me for the first time in the entire hearing. Mom, he said, and his voice broke completely, forgive me. You're right about everything. Patricia convinced me that you were losing your faculties, that it was for your own good, that it was the best for everyone. But she never told me she had forged documents. She never told me she had sabotaged your job. I thought you really needed help. And the condo in Miami? The judge asked. Michael closed his eyes. That was Patricia's idea. She said it was an investment, that with the profits we could pay for a better nursing home for Mom. I was a coward and an idiot. Michael, I said, and for the first time in months my voice sounded motherly, being an idiot can be forgiven. Being an accomplice to cruelty, cannot. The judge took notes for several minutes while we remained in silence. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at all of us. I am going to suspend this hearing, he announced. I need to review all the documentation presented and the testimonies heard. But I can tell you that what I have seen and heard here today has nothing to do with mental incapacity and a lot to do with financial abuse and possible document forgery. He addressed Patricia directly. Mrs. Vance, I strongly recommend that you seek independent legal counsel. It is very possible that you will face criminal charges. Patricia ran out of the room without looking back. Michael remained standing, looking at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, he said, is there any way to fix this? I looked at him for a long moment. This 45-year-old man crying like a child was my son, but he was also the man who had signed the papers to take my house away. Michael, I finally said, fixing this is not up to me. It's up to you. I left the courthouse on Mrs. Davis's arm, feeling for the first time in months that I could breathe fully. 3 weeks after the suspended hearing, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Michael, but his voice sounded different, smaller, more broken, as if he had aged years in those few days. Mom, he said, I need to see you. I have to tell you things that I should have told you a long time ago. We arranged to meet at a classic diner in Pasadena, a small place where we used to have breakfast together when he was a college student and I worked cleaning offices nearby. It had been more than 10 years since we had been there, but somehow it seemed fitting that this would be the place where my son would try to explain how he had come to betray me so completely. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose the corner booth, the same one where we used to sit when he was in his 20s and told me about his dreams of starting a business, of getting married, of having children, of giving me grandchildren who would fill my old age with joy. How naive I had been to believe that a mother's love was a sufficient shield against greed. Michael showed up on time, but he was unrecognizable. He had lost weight, had deep dark circles under his eyes, and his suit, always impeccable when he was with Patricia, now looked wrinkled and neglected. He sat across from me without taking off his jacket, as if planning a quick escape. "Mom," he began, "Patricia's gone." "Where to?" "I don't know. She disappeared the night after the hearing. She took everything, the clothes, the jewelry, the money from our joint accounts. She even sold her car and mine too, apparently." His voice was a whisper. "She left a note saying that if I was stupid enough to choose an old woman over our future, I deserved to be left with nothing." An old woman. That's how Patricia had seen me all these years, and probably how she had portrayed me to Michael. Not Carol, not her mother-in-law, not the mother of the man she supposedly loved. Just an old woman who was an obstacle between her and the money. "Michael," I said, "do you realize that Patricia didn't disappear out of hurt feelings? She disappeared because she knows she's going to be investigated for fraud." He nodded miserably. "The lawyer told me it's very likely she'll be prosecuted. Forging medical documents is a felony. And the job sabotage, that could have criminal consequences too." He ordered a coffee that he didn't drink, while I sipped my chamomile tea and waited for him to find the words for what he had really come to say. "Mom," he said finally, "I have to tell you how this all started." And he told me everything. With a brutal honesty I hadn't seen in him since he was a teenager. He told me how Patricia had started asking about my financial situation just 2 months into their relationship. "Does your mother have savings? Is the house paid off? Are there other properties?" At first, he had thought it was normal curiosity from someone who wanted to get to know the family. He told me how Patricia had insisted on taking me to lunch every weekend, not out of family affection, but to meticulously assess every valuable object in my house. "Is that painting an original? Are those porcelain figurines antiques? Does your mother know what they're worth?" He told me how Patricia had suggested I was losing it long before there was any real evidence. "Notice how she repeats her stories, Michael. Look at how she forgets things. At her age, living alone is dangerous." "And you believed her?" I asked. "I wanted to believe her," he admitted, his head bowed. "It was easier to think you had problems than to face the fact that my wife was planning to rob you." He told me how Patricia had forged my signature on bank documents to access information about my accounts. How she had obtained copies of the deed to my house through contacts at the county recorder's office. How she had sought out doctors willing to sign false reports in exchange for money. Dr. Mendoza wasn't the only one, he confessed. Patricia visited 5 different doctors before finding one who would agree to sign a report without actually examining you. She paid him $2,000. $2,000 for a piece of paper declaring my mental incapacity. That was the price she had put on my dignity, on my autonomy, on my right to exist as a capable person. "And the condo in Miami?" I asked. Michael closed his eyes as if the question caused him physical pain. "There is no condo in Miami, Mom." "What?" "Patricia made it all up. She used the $30,000 to pay off credit card debts she had accumulated before she met me. Shoes, handbags, trips, clothes. She was broke when she came into my life, and she saw you as the solution to all her problems." The coffee Michael hadn't touched had grown completely cold, like his marriage, like the relationship we had once had, like all the lies that had sustained his life for the past few years. "Michael," I said, "do you know what part hurts the most in all of this?" "What?" "It's not that you chose Patricia over me. It's that you chose to be an accomplice to something you knew was wrong." "I didn't know." "Yes, you did," I interrupted firmly. "Maybe you didn't know all the details, but you knew what they were doing to me wasn't right. You knew I wasn't losing my faculties. You knew I was capable of taking care of myself. You knew this was all a lie to get my house." Michael began to cry. Not the dignified cry of a man who regrets his actions, but the desperate sob of someone who has realized he has lost the only thing that truly mattered for something that was never real. "What can I do to fix it?" he asked through his tears. "Michael," I said, "there are things that can't be fixed. You can return the money, you can help with the legal investigations, you can testify against Patricia. But you can't restore the trust you destroyed. You can't erase the months I spent working like a slave to pay debts you created. You can't give me back the nights I cried wondering what I did wrong as a mother. But we can try." "No," I interrupted. "We are not going to try anything. You are going to do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because you expect it to make me forgive you. I took a folder I had prepared that morning from my purse. These are all the documents related to the fraudulent mortgage on my house. You are going to take them to your lawyer and you are going to do whatever is necessary to nullify that debt. You are going to put my house back in my name. And you are going to do it without expecting anything in return. Of course, Mom. Anything. Furthermore, I continued, you are going to testify against Patricia when they find her. You are going to tell the district attorney everything you've told me. You are going to help make her pay for what she did, not just to me, but to all the other women who might be in my situation. Michael nodded vigorously, as if my forgiveness depended on his enthusiasm. And after that? He asked with a hopeful voice. After that, Michael, you are going to leave. You are going to rebuild your life away from me. You are going to learn to live with the consequences of your decisions, and I am going to learn to live without the son I thought I had. Mom, please. Michael, I said, standing up, I loved you from the moment you were born until the moment you chose to betray me. That will never change. But love doesn't mean I have to continue to be a victim of your cowardice. I left money on the table for my tea and walked towards the door. Michael didn't follow me. When I reached the street, I turned to look at him one last time through the diner window. He was sitting exactly as I had left him, his head in his hands, surrounded by the wreckage of a life he himself had destroyed. That night, back on Mrs. Davis's couch, I called the lawyer the court had assigned me. Mr. Martinez, I said, I want to drop all charges against my son. Are you sure, Mrs. Miller? He was an accomplice. I'm sure. Michael is going to voluntarily cooperate with the investigation against Patricia. But I don't want to be the mother who destroys her son, even if he was willing to destroy me. And what about your house? Michael is going to give it back. Not by court order, but because it's the right thing to do. Mrs. Miller, the lawyer said with admiration in his voice, you are an extraordinary woman. No, irreplia. I am a woman who has learned the difference between loving someone and allowing them to abuse me. I hung up the phone and looked out Mrs. Davis's window at the lights of Los Angeles. For the first time in months, I wasn't planning my survival for the next day. I was planning my freedom for the rest of my life. 6 months after that conversation at the diner, I was standing on the threshold of my house in Pasadena, holding the keys I thought I would never have again. Michael had kept his word. The legal paperwork had been processed, the fraudulent mortgage had been nullified, and my name was once again the sole owner on the deed. But the woman opening that door was not the same one who had walked out of it 8 months earlier with a suitcase and a broken heart. The inside of the house smelled of stale air and silence, but also of possibilities. The week before, Mrs. Davis and her grandchildren had helped me clean and air out every room. Paul and Lucy had run through the hallways shouting with joy, as if it were their own home that had been rescued. Grandma Carol can come home now. Lucy had shouted, and for the first time in years, the word grandma hadn't hurt me, but filled me with a warmth I didn't remember. The first thing I did upon entering was go straight to the living room and throw open all the curtains. The October light flooded in, revealing the dust floating in the air like tiny particles of hope. The furniture that Patricia and Michael had considered worthless was still there, the burgundy velvet sofa John and I had chosen for our first home, the dining table where we had celebrated so many birthdays, the bookshelves full of books no one had wanted to steal because they didn't understand that stories have no price on the black market. I stood in the center of the living room, slowly turning to take in that this was real, that I was back, that I had won. But the most surprising thing was not getting my house back, it was discovering that the woman who now inhabited it was completely different. That afternoon, while organizing the few personal items I had managed to save, I found a photograph at the bottom of my suitcase that I didn't remember packing. It was from my wedding to John, but not the typical formal picture. In this one, we were laughing because the wind had messed up my veil and John was trying unsuccessfully to fix it. My eyes in that photo shone with a happiness I hadn't seen on my face for years. I sat on the sofa, holding the photograph, and wondered when I had stopped being that woman who laughed so easily. Had it been gradual, or had there been a specific moment when the joy had left? It didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in years, I felt that woman could exist again. The next day I made a decision that surprised even myself. I went to a hair salon. Not the cheap neighborhood place where I had been getting my hair cut for 20 years, but a chic one on Rodeo Drive that I had seen in a magazine. I spent more money on that visit than I usually spend on food in a week, but when I walked out with a modern cut that framed my face and silver highlights that made my hair seem to shimmer instead of just being gray, I felt as if I had reclaimed a part of myself that I had buried under years of self-denial. The stylist, a young woman with tattoos on her arms and a genuine smile, had told me, "Ma'am, you have beautiful eyes. Let's make them stand out." And when I looked at myself in the mirror at the end, for the first time in years I didn't see a tired old woman. I saw Carol Miller, a woman who had survived a war and come out victorious. That week I also did something I hadn't done in decades. I bought myself clothes. Not out of necessity, not because what I had was worn out, but because I wanted to. I walked into Nordstrom with the determination of someone going to an important meeting, and I tried on dresses, blouses, pants, even shoes with a small heel that made me feel taller and more confident. The sales associate, a woman my age with perfectly coiffed hair, helped me with a patience I hadn't expected. "Is this for a special occasion?" she asked as I tried on an electric blue dress I never would have considered before. "Yes," I replied, "for the rest of my life." She laughed as if I had made a joke, but I was completely serious. Every item I chose was a statement. I was no longer going to dress like a woman who expects to become invisible. I was no longer going to choose muted colors and cuts that hid my body as if it were something to be ashamed of. On Friday of that week, Mrs. Davis came to visit with a bottle of champagne and a conspiratorial smile. "Carol, my dear," she said as I served appetizers in my own kitchen for the first time in months, "there's something I want to propose to you." "What?" "My cousin Rosa has a dance studio in Silver Lake. She teaches salsa classes for women our age. She says she needs more students." Mrs. Davis looked at me with those sparkling eyes that meant she had already made a decision for both of us. "I thought we could sign up." "Eleanor, I don't know how to dance." "So what?" "Neither do I. But we're in our 70s, we've survived marriages, children, betrayals, and losses. I think we can survive a few dance classes." The idea terrified and excited me in equal parts. It had been decades since I had done anything just for fun, with no purpose other than the pleasure of doing it. For years, every decision had been dictated by the needs of others: John's during his illness, Michael's during his financial crises, Patricia's during her campaign to steal from me. "When do we start?" I asked. The first class was a beautiful disaster. Rosa, a vibrant woman in her 60s with red-dyed hair and hands that seemed to tell stories when they moved, welcomed 8 nervous women into a studio filled with mirrors and natural light. "Ladies," she said with infectious energy, "we are going to forget everything they told us about how women our age should behave. Here, we are going to make noise, we are going to take up space, and we are going to celebrate that we are still alive." During the first hour, I stumbled more times than I could count. My feet seemed to have forgotten how to follow a rhythm, and my arms moved as if they belonged to someone else. But when Rosa put on the music, passionate Latin guitar that filled the studio with a fire I had forgotten existed, something inside me woke up. It wasn't grace I felt, or skill. It was freedom. "Like that, Carol," Rosa shouted when I finally managed to complete a basic sequence without tripping. "With that fire. As if your life depended on it." And in a way, it did. Not my physical survival, but my emotional rebirth. Every step, every clap, every turn of my head was a declaration: I am still here, I am still a woman, I am still capable of beauty and joy. After class, as Mrs. Davis and I had coffee at a nearby cafe, I realized it had been hours since I had thought about Michael, Patricia, or everything I had lost. For the first time in months, I had been completely present in a moment of pure happiness. "You know what the best part of this is?" Mrs. Davis said. "What?" "That we're doing it for ourselves. Not because our children asked us to, not because our husbands would have approved, not because it's what's expected of us. Just because we want to." That night, alone in my reclaimed house, I drew a hot bath, another luxury I had forgotten I could afford, and soaked in water scented with salts I had bought that same afternoon. As I lay there, relaxed for the first time in years, I thought about all the versions of myself I had been: the loving bride, the devoted wife, the sacrificial mother, the tireless caregiver, the silent victim. Now I was something new, a free woman. Not free from responsibilities or the reality of being 73 in a world that often treats older women as if they are invisible. But free from the need to please others at the cost of my own dignity. Free from the obligation to accept crumbs of affection from people who saw me as a means to their ends. Free from having to justify my existence or my worth to anyone. That night I slept in my own bed, in my own house, being completely my own person for the first time in decades. And when I woke up the next day, the first thing I did was look in the mirror and smile. The woman who smiled back was 73 years old, with silver hair and expression lines that told the story of a life fully lived. But she also had something in her eyes that had been absent for years: hope. "Good morning, Carol," I said to my reflection. "What are we going to do today?" The possibilities seemed endless. A year later, I'm sitting on the deck of my renovated house, watching the golden Los Angeles sunset while sipping a glass of red wine that I chose just because I like the taste, not because it's cheap or on sale. At my feet rests a new companion, Luna, a sweet-eyed mutt I adopted from the shelter 3 months ago. Not to fill a void, but to share the abundance of love I had discovered I still had to give. The deck is new. Well, it had always been there, but for decades it had been a forgotten space where I stored old junk and hung laundry. Now it has plants that I chose and planted myself, red geraniums that shine like little suns, lavender that perfumes the summer nights, and a small fig tree that the gardener assured me would bear fruit next year. "You'll be 75 by then," he had said with a smile. "Think you're too old to eat figs from your own tree?" I had replied that at 75 I planned to be more alive than ever, and now, looking at the first green leaves beginning to sprout, I know it was true. The sound of the doorbell interrupts my thoughts. Luna pricks up her ears but doesn't get alarmed. She already knows the rhythm of the visits I receive now. It could be Mrs. Davis, who comes for tea almost every afternoon. It could be Rosa, my dance teacher, who sometimes stops by to chat after her classes. It could be one of the women from the support group I started coordinating 6 months ago, women who, like me, had discovered that their families saw them more as assets than as people. But when I open the door, it's Michael. It's been 8 months since I last saw him. He's thinner, with premature gray hairs he didn't have before, and he's holding a bouquet of flowers I recognize immediately, white daisies, my favorite, the same ones he would bring me when he was little and had done something mischievous. "Hi, Mom," he says, his voice uncertain. "Can I come in?" I watch him for a long moment. This 46-year-old man trembling slightly on my doorstep was once my baby, my boy, my greatest pride. He was also the person who was willing to have me declared incompetent to steal my house. Both things are true, and I have learned to live with that contradiction. "You can come in," I say, "but only if you understand that this isn't a reconciliation. It's a conversation." He nods gratefully and follows me into the living room. He remains standing, looking around with a surprised expression. The house is unrecognizable. The walls have been painted in warm colors, there is new art on the walls, paintings I bought because I liked them, not because they were cheap, and the whole space breathes a serene elegance it never had before. It's beautiful," he says. "Thank you. Do you want some coffee?" "Please." As I make coffee in my renovated kitchen, another investment in myself that had brought me unexpected pleasure, Michael sits on the new sofa. Not in the spot he used to occupy when he came with Patricia to plan my destruction, but on the opposite side, like a polite guest who knows his place. "How have you been?" he asks when I return with the mugs. "Well," I answer simply. "And you?" "Mom, these have been the worst months of my life." I don't respond. I've learned that silence is a powerful tool, that I don't have to fill every awkward pause with reassuring words. "Patricia was arrested in Las Vegas 3 months ago," he continues. "She was trying to do the same thing to an older man she had met online. When the police searched her apartment, they found forged documents for 5 other victims. 5 others. Patricia had been a professional predator, and I had been just one more on her list of targets. Somehow, that information doesn't hurt as much as I thought it would. On the contrary, it confirms something I had begun to understand, that what happened to me wasn't my fault. It wasn't because I was too trusting or too foolish. It was because I crossed paths with a criminal. She's in jail, awaiting trial," Michael continues. "It's scheduled for next month. My testimony will be one of the main pieces of evidence." "Good," I say. "I hope she pays for what she did. Not just to me, but to all her victims." "Mom," Michael says, setting his mug on the table with trembling hands, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that I've been going to therapy." "Oh?" "The therapist is helping me understand how I could have betrayed the person who loved me most in the world. How I could choose to be an accomplice to someone who was destroying you." He looks at me with eyes full of tears. "Mom, not a day goes by that I don't regret it. Not a night goes by that I don't wake up thinking about how different it could have been if I'd had the courage to stand up to Patricia from the beginning." "Michael," I say in a calm voice, "regret is the price you pay for the choices you make. It's not my responsibility to lighten that burden for you." "I know," he whispers. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I lost. Not just your house or your money. I lost you. I lost the only person who loved me unconditionally, and I lost her because of my own cowardice." I look at him for a long moment. This man crying on my new sofa is my son, but he is also a stranger. For 46 years I thought I knew him, that I understood his character, that I could predict his decisions. Now I know that people can surprise you, for better and for worse, even after decades. "Michael," I finally say, "I'm going to tell you something that might help you in your therapy." "What?" "For months after I lost the house, I tortured myself wondering what I had done wrong as a mother. I wondered if I had spoiled you, if I had been too permissive, if I hadn't taught you strong enough values." Michael opens his mouth to protest, but I stop him with a gesture. "But then I realized something. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I was a mother who loved you, who cared for you, who sacrificed for you without expecting anything in return. The fact that you chose to betray that love is not a reflection of my failure as a mother. It is a reflection of your failure as a son." The words fall between us like stones in still water. "That means," I continue, "that your redemption doesn't depend on me either. It depends on you. On the decisions you make from now on." On how you choose to live with the knowledge of what you did. Michael nods slowly, as if finally understanding something that had been eluding him. Is there any chance, he begins, but doesn't finish the question, that we can go back to being mother and son like before? No. That relationship died the day you decided Patricia was more important than me. My voice is firm but not cruel. But is there a chance we can build something new, based on mutual respect and clear boundaries? That depends on you. What would I have to do? Nothing for me, I say. Everything for you. You have to learn to live with integrity, not because you expect a reward, but because it's the only way of life worth living. You have to learn to make the hard choices when it's the right thing to do, not when it's the easy thing to do. I stand up, indicating that the conversation is over. And Michael, if you ever decide to show up in my life again, let it be because you've found a way to contribute something positive, not because you need something from me. I walk him to the door. On the threshold, he turns to me one last time. Mom, are you happy? The question surprises me with its simplicity. Yes, I reply, and I realize it's the purest truth I've spoken in years. I am happy. After he leaves, I go back out to my deck. The sun has set completely, and the lights of Los Angeles glitter like earthbound stars. Luna comes to sit at my feet, and I stroke her ears as I reflect on the conversation. I don't feel the satisfaction of revenge, nor the bitterness of resentment. I feel something much more powerful, peace. Tomorrow is Wednesday, which means dance class. The day after, I have lunch with the women from the support group. On Saturday, Mrs. Davis and I are taking the train to Santa Barbara, just because we've never been together and because we can. On Sunday, I have a date with a charming 75-year-old man I met at the library, who asked me for coffee after we discovered we were both reading the same book of poetry. My life is full of small adventures and great joys that I have chosen for myself, by myself. I raise my wine glass to the night sky in a silent toast, to the women who learn it's never too late to start over, to those who discover that freedom isn't given but won, to those who understand that self-love isn't selfishness but survival. Have you ever experienced a similar situation, or do you know someone who has? Tell me about it in the comments. If this story has touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it.